Picture this. You're watching through your kitchen window as three teenagers spray paint "Go Back to China" across the bamboo walls of the meditation space that literally keeps you sane. The acrid smell of spray paint cuts through the humid Florida air like a knife, mixing with the sweet scent of jasmine from your stone garden. You hear the crack of bamboo snapping under their boots, and your heart starts racing with that familiar metallic taste of a panic attack creeping up your throat. But here's what those vandals didn't know. What the HOA vice president who sent them didn't know. What nobody in my pristine Sunset Palms neighborhood knew. They just picked a fight with someone who makes a living hunting down digital predators and exposing their secrets. And I was about to turn their own system against them in ways they never saw coming. Before I tell you how I systematically destroyed a racist real estate conspiracy using nothing but a laptop and some very pissed off neighbors, I need to know something. Have you ever had someone try to literally erase your culture from existence? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Because I want to know if this kind of thing happens everywhere, or if Florida just has a special talent for breeding HOA psychopaths. My name is Thomas Nakamura, and 6 months ago, I thought I'd found paradise in Sarasota. After burning out spectacularly in Silicon Valley, working 18-hour days for a fintech company that treated cybersecurity specialists like caffeinated code monkeys, I needed somewhere quiet to rebuild my mental health. Florida seemed perfect. Warm weather, reasonable home prices, and far enough from the tech world chaos that maybe I could actually sleep through the night again. The panic attacks had started during my last year in California. Picture waking up at 3 in the morning with your heart hammering so hard you think you're having a heart attack, drenched in sweat, convinced that every shadow in your apartment is a threat. When you spend your days thinking like a hacker to protect against hackers, your brain doesn't exactly have an off switch. My grandfather taught me the solution years before I understood its value. Gigi came to America in 1962 with nothing but a suitcase and an unshakable belief in the power of ritual to ground a scattered mind. Even after being interned during World War II, even after losing everything twice, he never gave up the tea ceremony. Every morning, every evening, he'd disappear into his tiny meditation corner and perform the same precise movements his father taught him in Kyoto. "Thomas-kun," he'd tell me in his careful English, "the ceremony is not about tea. It is about creating peace in a space where peace seems impossible." So when I bought my house in Sunset Palms, the first thing I did was clear out the back corner of my yard and build a proper shashitsu, traditional tea house complete with tatami mats, sliding doors, and a small stone garden with a bamboo water feature. The sound of that water trickling over stones became my anchor. 20 minutes of tea ceremony every morning kept the panic attacks at bay and let me function well enough to work remotely for my new company. That little 8x10-foot sanctuary saved my career and probably my sanity. Without it, I couldn't concentrate long enough to write code, couldn't sit through video calls without hyperventilating, couldn't do the high-level threat analysis that paid for my mortgage. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first. Sunset Palms marketed itself as a diverse, welcoming community for young professionals and empty nesters. The reality was about what you'd expect from a Florida development where most houses start at $500,000. Mostly white, mostly conservative, mostly people who smiled to your face and saved their real opinions for HOA meetings. But I kept to myself, did my work, and figured as long as I maintained my property and paid my dues, we'd all get along fine. I should have known better. Cynthia Rogers announced herself into my life on a Tuesday morning in March, clicking across my driveway in heels that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. Picture the kind of woman who wears a tennis outfit to conduct business because it signals that she has enough money to play tennis in the middle of a workday. Perfectly highlighted blonde hair, a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and the unmistakable aura of someone accustomed to getting her way through a combination of social pressure and veiled threats. "Thomas, isn't it?" she said, extending a manicured hand that felt cold despite the Florida heat. "I'm Cynthia Rogers, Vice President of the Sunset Palms Homeowners Association. I also run Rogers Premier Properties here in Sarasota." The smell of her expensive perfume couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of desperation that hangs around real estate agents who haven't had a good month in a while. I later learned this was exactly the case, but that morning I just thought she was being neighborly. "We've received some concerns about the structure in your backyard," she continued, nodding toward my tea house with the kind of expression usually reserved for discovering dog waste on your shoe. "Several residents have questions about whether it complies with our architectural guidelines." I felt my stomach drop. Here's something most people don't realize about HOAs. They operate like mini governments with the power to fine you, place liens on your property, and eventually force you into foreclosure, all for violations of rules that they can essentially make up as they go along. And unlike actual governments, they don't have to worry about constitutional protections or due process. "What kind of concerns?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Well, Sunset Palms prides itself on maintaining a cohesive aesthetic that preserves property values for all residents. The way she said cohesive made it sound like my tea house was some kind of architectural cancer. Your structure has a very distinctive cultural appearance that some feel might not align with our community standards. There it was. The polite, legally defensible way of saying take down your foreign-looking building because it makes the white people uncomfortable. I checked the architectural guidelines before I built it, I said. Single-story accessory structures under 10 feet in height set back at least 15 feet from property lines. My tea house meets all those requirements. Cynthia's smile got even chillier. The guidelines also include provisions for maintaining neighborhood character and property values. I'm sure you understand that what might be appropriate in other communities might not fit here in Sunset Palms. The metallic taste was starting to creep up my throat again. This was exactly the kind of confrontation that could trigger a full panic attack, but I forced myself to stay focused. In cybersecurity, the first rule is never reveal what you know until you know what they know. I'll need to see the specific guideline violations in writing, I told her. Of course, she said, still smiling. You'll be receiving formal notification within 48 hours. I do hope we can resolve this amicably, Thomas. It would be such a shame if this became complicated. She clicked back to her white BMW X5, but not before taking several photos of my tea house with her phone. I watched her drive away and felt that familiar tightness in my chest that meant I needed to get to my meditation space immediately. 20 minutes later, sitting on my tatami mat with a cup of green tea warming my hands, I started thinking like a security analyst instead of a victim. Cynthia Rogers had just made a crucial mistake. She'd revealed that this wasn't about architectural guidelines at all. This was about cultural appearance. And in my experience, people who are comfortable being casually racist in front of strangers usually aren't very careful about hiding their more explicit prejudices. I had no idea just how careless she'd been. The formal notice arrived exactly 48 hours later, hand-delivered by someone who looked like private security rather than a mail carrier. Thick envelope, official letterhead, and the kind of legal language designed to intimidate people into compliance without actually having to go to court. Notice of architectural violation, unauthorized cultural chbachar religious structure. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. The letter claimed my tea house violated Section 4.7 of the Community Guidelines, structures that significantly alter the traditional American residential character of the neighborhood. There was also something about potential religious observances that may disturb neighbors and maintenance of property values through architectural consistency. The deadline for compliance was brutal. Remove the structure within 30 days or face daily fines of $300, plus the possibility of liens and foreclosure proceedings. $300 a day for a meditation space that was quieter than most people's air conditioning units. I sat in my kitchen reading this legal garbage and felt the panic starting to build again. Without my morning and evening tea ceremony, I'd be back to barely functional within a week. Without being functional, I'd lose my job. Without my job, I'd lose the house anyway. But then I noticed something interesting. The letter was sent as a PDF attachment to an email, and when I looked at the metadata, it showed it had been created on a computer registered to Kroger's office. More importantly, the document properties showed it had been edited multiple times with tracked changes that weren't properly removed. See, here's what most people don't understand about digital documents. When you create a Word file or PDF, it embeds all kinds of information about when it was created, who created it, what changes were made, and sometimes even what other documents were open at the same time. It's like a fingerprint that most people never think to scrub. I opened the file in a hex editor and found fragments of deleted text that made my blood run cold. Remove all non-European architectural elements. Phase 2 target properties include Nakamura, Chen, and Gonzalez residences. Coordinate with Stevens Development Group for bulk purchase offers. This wasn't about my tea house. This was about systematically pushing out non-white families to make room for some kind of development deal. But I needed more evidence before I could do anything about it. The harassment started small, the way these things always do. Random inspections of my property while I was trying to work. Cynthia would show up with a clipboard and a camera, claiming to document ongoing violations while I was in the middle of important video calls. "Sorry, Thomas," she'd say with that fake smile, snapping photos through my windows while I'm trying to explain threat assessment protocols to a room full of executives. "Just need to verify compliance with community standards." The psychological effect was immediate and deliberate. Every time I started to relax into my workflow, every time the tea ceremony started to calm my nervous system, there was Cynthia or one of her associates disrupting my space. It's a classic intimidation tactic, and it was working. Then came the flyers. Someone started leaving anonymous notices on windshields throughout the neighborhood. Protect your property values. Report architectural violations. They included photos of my tea house alongside dire warnings about how non-conforming structures could reduce everyone's home equity. Here's a knowledge nugget most people don't know. In real estate, fear is the most powerful sales tool. If you can convince homeowners that their property values are threatened, they'll support almost any action to eliminate that threat. Even if the threat is completely fabricated, the flyers worked exactly as intended. Within a week, I was getting dirty looks from neighbors who'd been perfectly friendly before. The elderly woman across the street started closing her curtains whenever she saw me in my yard. The young family next door stopped letting their kids play near our shared fence line, but the flyers also gave me something valuable: more digital evidence. The PDF files were created on the same computer as my violation notice. Same user account, same software, same metadata fingerprints. More importantly, the images were taken with a phone that had GPS coordinates embedded in the EXIF data, timestamps showing they were photographed during one of Cynthia's official inspections. I was starting to build a pattern, but I still needed to understand the bigger picture. The break came during one of my worst panic attacks in months. It was late evening, and I'd spent the day fighting with my company's insurance provider about coverage for anxiety medication, the kind of bureaucratic nightmare that leaves you feeling like your brain is wrapped in cotton while someone pounds nails into your skull. I stumbled out to my tea house, hoping the evening ceremony would calm me down enough to sleep. But someone had been there ahead of me. The smell hit me first. Spray paint, sharp and chemical, mixing with the humid night air. Then I saw the graffiti splashed across my bamboo walls in dripping red letters: "Go back to China," and "No rice eaters." For the record, I'm Japanese American, born in San Francisco, and my family's been here longer than most of these people's grandparents. But racists have never been big on accuracy. I stood there staring at my destroyed meditation space, feeling my heart rate spike into the danger zone, when my phone started buzzing with Wi-Fi connection notifications. My laptop, sitting on the kitchen counter, was picking up several new networks that weren't usually visible from my house. That's when the panic attack really hit. The world started tunneling. My chest felt like someone was sitting on it, and I couldn't get enough air. I stumbled back toward the house, grabbing my laptop just to have something to focus on besides the feeling that I was dying. The Wi-Fi network Croger's iPhone was broadcasting unsecured, no password required. Now, I want to be very clear about something. I'm a cybersecurity professional, and under normal circumstances, I would never access someone else's network without permission. It's illegal, it's unethical, and it's exactly the kind of behavior I'm paid to protect against. But I was having a panic attack, I wasn't thinking clearly, and my laptop automatically connected to the strongest available signal. What I found in that shared network folder changed everything. Here's another knowledge nugget. Most people think cybersecurity is about firewalls and encryption, but the biggest vulnerability is always human stupidity. People use the same passwords for everything. They leave sensitive files in shared folders, and they have no idea how much information their devices broadcast to anyone who knows how to look. Cynthia Rogers was a textbook example of every security mistake you can make. Her phone was automatically backing up to a cloud service that synced with a shared folder on her network. No password protection, no encryption, just raw files dumped where anyone could access them. Photos, documents, emails, text messages, all sitting there like a digital confession waiting to be discovered. The folder labeled Neighborhood Improvement Project contained everything I needed to understand what was really happening in Sunset Palms. Email chains between Cynthia and something called Stevens Development Group discussing the purchase of targeted properties at below-market prices. Text messages coordinating with other HOA board members about which families to pressure first. Spreadsheets listing every non-white household in the neighborhood with notes about their vulnerabilities. Nakamura, works from home, anxiety issues, isolated. Chen family, elderly, language barriers, unlikely to fight back. Gonzalez, single mother, financial stress, needs quick sale. But the most damning evidence was a recorded phone conversation between Cynthia and her business partner discussing how to manipulate property appraisals for undesirable sellers while inflating values for their development group's bulk purchases. "These people don't understand the market anyway," Cynthia's voice said through my laptop speakers. "We offer them 60% of actual value, tell them it's because of neighborhood issues, and they take it. Especially the older Asian families. They just want to avoid conflict." I sat in my kitchen at midnight, staring at a computer screen full of evidence that would destroy everything Cynthia Rogers had built. And for the first time in months, my panic attack completely disappeared, because now I had a plan. Building a federal case requires patience, documentation, and allies. Lucky for me, I had professional experience with all three. First, I needed to properly preserve the digital evidence in a way that would hold up in court. That meant creating forensically sound copies with verified timestamps and chain of custody documentation. In cybersecurity, we call this preservation of volatile data, and there are very specific protocols for doing it legally. I spent the next week carefully documenting everything in Cynthia's files, taking screenshots, creating encrypted backups, and building a timeline of the harassment campaign. Every email, every text message, every recorded conversation that showed deliberate discrimination based on race and national origin. But I also needed human allies, because digital evidence means nothing without real people willing to testify about their experiences. My first ally was Mrs. Sarah Goldstein, the 78-year-old Jewish woman who lived 2 houses down. I'd noticed she was one of the few neighbors who hadn't started avoiding me after the flyer campaign. When I knocked on her door with a printed copy of some of Cynthia's most explicitly racist emails, her reaction was immediate and fierce. "This is how it starts," she said, her voice shaking with anger as she read about plans to pressure undesirable ethnic families into selling below market value. "First they come for your property values, then they come for your civil rights. I've seen this before, Thomas, in Poland, before my family escaped." Mrs. Goldstein had been in Sunset Palms for 15 years, long enough to remember when the neighborhood was more diverse and less obsessed with architectural consistency. She also had contacts with the local chapter of the Anti-Defamation League and knew which lawyers specialized in federal civil rights cases. My second ally was Maria Gonzalez, the single mother Cynthia had specifically targeted for being financially vulnerable. When I showed her the documents proving that her recent property appraisal had been deliberately manipulated to pressure her into a quick sale, she broke down crying. "I thought I was losing my mind," she told me. "They kept telling me my house was worth less because of neighborhood factors, but it didn't make sense. Houses just like mine were selling for twice what they offered." Maria had received the same kind of harassment I was getting. Surprise inspections, nitpicking violations, daily fines for things like excessive yard decorations. She had a small Virgin Mary statue in her garden. But she also had something I didn't. Contacts in the local Hispanic community, including several families who'd been pressured into selling over the past 2 years. The pattern was becoming clear. Cynthia Rogers and Stevens Development Group were running a systematic campaign to force out minority families, acquire their properties at below-market prices, and then flip them for massive profits to their preferred demographic of buyers. It was textbook housing discrimination, and it was completely illegal under federal law. Here's something most people don't know about the Fair Housing Act. It doesn't just prohibit discrimination in home sales and rentals. It also makes it illegal to intimidate or harass people based on their race, religion, or national origin in ways that interfere with their housing rights. This includes things like targeted enforcement of HOA rules, spreading rumors to damage property values, and creating hostile environments designed to force people to move. The penalties are severe. We're talking about federal investigations, criminal charges, and civil damages that can reach into the millions. Real estate agents can lose their licenses permanently. HOA board members can be personally liable for discrimination that happens under their authority. But here's the catch. You need overwhelming evidence to make federal prosecutors pay attention. One person's complaint about HOA harassment usually gets dismissed as a neighborly dispute. You need to prove systematic discrimination affecting multiple families, with clear evidence of discriminatory intent. Thanks to Cynthia's complete lack of digital security, I had exactly that. I reached out to James Crawford, a civil rights attorney Mrs. Goldstein recommended. Crawford specialized in housing discrimination cases and had a reputation for taking on well-connected defendants who thought they were untouchable. When I walked into his office with 3 laptops full of evidence, his reaction was immediate. "This is the most thoroughly documented housing discrimination case I've seen in 20 years of practice." We spent 4 hours going through the digital evidence, email chains discussing how to encourage specific families to sell, recorded conversations about manipulating property appraisals based on owner demographics, text messages coordinating harassment campaigns with other HOA board members, financial documents showing the connection between Rogers Premier Properties and Stevens Development Group. "The federal prosecutors are going to love this," Crawford told me, "but we need to be strategic about timing. If we move too fast, they'll have time to destroy evidence and coordinate their stories. If we wait too long, they might escalate the harassment to the point where someone gets hurt." We decided to wait until Cynthia made her next big move, then hit her with everything at once. We didn't have to wait long. The demolition notice arrived on a Friday morning, hand-delivered by the same private security guy who'd brought my original violation letter. This time, the envelope contained a court order requiring me to remove my tea house within 72 hours, or face forced demolition at my expense, plus liens against my property for all associated costs. The order was signed by Judge Patricia Morrison, who, according to my research, was married to the city councilman who'd approved zoning variances for Stevens Development Group's previous projects. The whole system was rigged from top to bottom. But Cynthia had made a crucial mistake. She was in such a hurry to force the demolition that she'd filed the court documents before properly notifying all the affected parties. Under Florida law, I had the right to a hearing before any demolition order could be enforced. More importantly, she'd scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for Sunday evening to address ongoing architectural violations and community standards. The meeting notice specifically mentioned my property and invited all concerned residents to voice their opinions about maintaining neighborhood character. It was going to be a public lynching designed to pressure me into compliance through social isolation and community condemnation. Instead, it was going to be the perfect venue for exposing the entire conspiracy. Crawford filed for an emergency injunction to stop the demolition, citing violations of my due process rights and new evidence of discriminatory enforcement. The injunction hearing was scheduled for Monday morning, which meant the Sunday HOA meeting would happen with everyone thinking they had already won. I spent Saturday preparing for the most important presentation of my life. Sunday evening, the Sunset Palms Community Center was packed beyond capacity. Word had gotten out that there was going to be some kind of showdown about the foreign building that was supposedly destroying everyone's property values. People were standing along the walls, spilling out into the hallway, all waiting to see the neighborhood weirdo get his comeuppance. Cynthia Rogers stood at the front of the room in her tennis outfit, radiating confidence and satisfaction. She'd brought a PowerPoint presentation about maintaining community standards, and a stack of printed photos showing my tea house from unflattering angles. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice carrying that same fake warmth I'd learned to recognize. "As you know, we're here to address a serious threat to our community's character and property values." She clicked through slides showing property value trends, architectural guidelines, and legal precedents for HOA enforcement actions. Everything was professionally designed to make her look reasonable and me look like a selfish troublemaker who didn't care about his neighbors. "The structure in question," she said, displaying a photo of my tea house, "represents exactly the kind of cultural intrusion that can destroy the cohesive aesthetic we've all worked so hard to maintain." Cultural intrusion. She actually said that in front of a room full of people. I sat in the back row, laptop open, waiting for the perfect moment. Crawford was next to me, recording everything on his phone. Mrs. Goldstein was 3 rows ahead, periodically turning around to give me encouraging nods. Maria Gonzalez was near the front with 2 of her friends, all of them looking nervous but determined. "Now," Cynthia continued, "I know some of you might think we're being harsh, but property values in Sunset Palms have increased 17% over the past 3 years, precisely because we maintain standards. We cannot allow individual preferences to undermine the investment we've all made in this community." That's when I stood up. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'd like to address some of the claims Mrs. Rogers has made." The room went dead silent. Cynthia's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on a shade of red that matched her lipstick. "This is not a public forum," she said. "The board will hear your concerns through proper channels." "Actually," Crawford said, standing up beside me, "under Florida Statute 72303, any homeowner has the right to speak at HOA meetings regarding agenda items that affect their property." I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's projector system. "I think everyone here deserves to know what's really happening in Sunset Palms." The first slide was an email from Cynthia to Stevens Development Group, dated 6 months ago. "Phase 1 target acquisitions proceeding as planned. Nakamura property should be available for below-market purchase within 90 days, following harassment campaign." The room erupted. People were shouting questions, demanding explanations, trying to understand what they were looking at. I let the chaos build for a moment, then clicked to the next slide. A text message thread between Cynthia and another HOA board member. "Make sure the violations are applied consistently to non-white families only. We can't afford to look like we're targeting everyone." More shouting. Someone near the front yelled, "This can't be real?" But I could see doubt creeping into faces around the room. People were starting to recognize the pattern they'd been unconsciously participating in. The next slide was a recorded phone conversation, and I let Cynthia's own voice fill the room. "These people don't understand the market anyway. We offer them 60% of actual value, tell them it's because of neighborhood issues, and they take it, especially the older Asian families. They just want to avoid conflict." The silence that followed was deafening. "This is doctored," Cynthia said, but her voice had lost all its confidence. "This is some kind of technical manipulation." I clicked through the next 20 slides without saying a word. Financial documents showing kickbacks from Stevens Development, email chains discussing how to manipulate property appraisals, photos of deliberate vandalism being coordinated with random teenagers. a complete timeline of harassment campaigns against 7 different families over the past 2 years. When I reached the final slide, a spreadsheet listing every minority family in Sunset Palms with notes about their vulnerabilities and pressure points, the room was completely silent. "Mrs. Rogers," I said, my voice carrying across the stunned audience, "would you like to explain to your neighbors how much money you've made selling their community to developers?" But Cynthia Rogers was already halfway out the door, her heels clicking frantically across the floor as she ran to her BMW. She never made it home. Crawford had tipped off the FBI, and federal agents were waiting in her driveway with arrest warrants for housing discrimination, conspiracy, and wire fraud. The federal investigation moved faster than anyone expected. When you hand prosecutors a complete digital paper trail of systematic civil rights violations, they don't need to spend months building a case. Cynthia Rogers lost her real estate license within 2 weeks. Rogers Premier Properties filed for bankruptcy within a month, facing lawsuits from 17 different families who'd been discriminated against over the past 3 years. Stevens Development Group had their city contracts canceled and faced federal charges for conspiracy to violate civil rights. Judge Patricia Morrison recused herself from all HOA-related cases and announced her early retirement after the FBI started investigating her financial connections to the development group. But the most satisfying outcome was what happened to my tea house. The emergency injunction became a permanent protection order. More than that, the Sarasota County Cultural Heritage Board designated my meditation space as a protected cultural landmark, recognizing its significance as an example of traditional Japanese architecture and its importance for mental health accessibility. Now, instead of being a target for harassment, my tea house has become a symbol of the neighborhood's commitment to diversity and inclusion. The new HOA board, elected after the federal investigation, actually featured it in their marketing materials as an example of Sunset Palms' celebration of cultural heritage. Mrs. Goldstein organized a neighborhood tea ceremony where I taught anyone interested the basics of the traditional ritual. 53 people showed up, including Maria Gonzalez's kids, who now stop by sometimes to help me tend the stone garden. The spray-painted graffiti is long gone, replaced by a small plaque that reads, "Nakamura Family Tea House, a place of peace and reflection, protected by federal civil rights law." I still do my morning and evening tea ceremonies, and the panic attacks are mostly under control now. The sound of water trickling over stone still centers my mind, but these days it's accompanied by the sound of neighborhood kids playing and neighbors actually talking to each other instead of whispering behind closed doors. Cynthia Rogers is serving 18 months in federal prison for conspiracy to violate civil rights. Her co-conspirators on the HOA board received probation and community service, plus lifetime bans from serving on any homeowners association. Stevens Development Group paid $2.3 million in civil settlements and disbanded under federal oversight. But here's the real victory. 3 other families in Sunset Palms have built cultural gardens and meditation spaces in their backyards. The neighborhood that was supposed to maintain traditional American residential character now looks like what America actually is, a place where different cultures can coexist and enrich each other. Maria Gonzalez built a beautiful shrine garden with native Florida plants and traditional Mexican tiles. The Chen family, who almost sold their house under pressure, created a Tai Chi courtyard that's become a morning gathering place for several neighbors. Even some of the longtime white residents have started incorporating diverse architectural elements, realizing that property values aren't threatened by cultural diversity, they're enhanced by it. I've gotten messages from people across the country who've watched this story unfold through local news coverage and social media. Cybersecurity professionals sharing their own experiences with digital evidence gathering. Civil rights attorneys asking for copies of my documentation methods. HOA victims who finally understand that they have legal options beyond just suffering in silence. Here's what I want you to remember if you're ever facing something like this. Document everything, find your allies, and never underestimate the power of patient, strategic thinking over emotional reactions. The people who try to erase your culture and steal your peace are counting on you to feel isolated and powerless. They're also counting on you not to understand that in the digital age, their own technology will always be their downfall. Every email they send, every photo they take, every coordination meeting they record, it's all evidence waiting to be discovered by someone who knows where to look. And if you're dealing with HOA harassment based on your race, religion, or national origin, know this: federal civil rights laws are on your side, and the penalties for housing discrimination are severe enough to destroy anyone stupid enough to put their prejudice in writing. The metallic taste of panic attacks has been replaced by the clean, earthy flavor of green tea and the satisfaction of justice served. My grandfather's tea ceremony tradition not only survived, it became the weapon that protected an entire community from systematic discrimination. Sometimes the most powerful form of resistance is simply refusing to disappear. Next week, I'm going to tell you about the former military contractor who used his explosives expertise to legally demolish his HOA president's illegal swimming pool, but that's a story for another time. Drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever used your professional skills to fight back against bureaucratic bullies? I want to hear how different experts handle these power-hungry neighborhood tyrants. And remember, they're only powerful until someone smarter starts paying attention to their mistakes.